created my own little algorithms to do one thing or another, like disease states, a mortality algorithm. And
I think you will have a whole levels of robotics, that humanoid robots or non-humanoid robots, whatever the case is.
But the one that I really gravitated towards was Alteryx. Low code, no code, business intelligence stuff, data science, machine learning, things like that.
Audio, or text, and then everything's big metaverse bug. Everybody knows the metaverse.
Another week of AI.
All right. AI. Let's get started. AI podcast. This is our 5th year of discussing artificial intelligence, and our focus has shifted from military veterans transitioning out of military for their career path, the future career path, now to just everybody in the workforce that is looking to transition. 5 years ago, there was an opportunity that is just growing even today. Right, these opportunities are growing. The tremendous amount of questions that are coming up to the surface right now, and everybody's asking. So we will do our part to answer as many questions as possible. So the format of this podcast is frequently asked questions, FAQ, and we will answer as many questions as we possibly can, because you can find those answers almost in ChatGPT, Gemini, and so many other places. And I'm going to do it with the help of this thing called YouTube. People are a fan of YouTube. I'm a big fan of YouTube. There are other places where you can go learn about YouTube. You can go learn about AI from YouTube, or you can go learn about AI from ChatGPT, OpenAI, other tools that you have like Claude, Anthropics, Gemini, Google. You have so many places you can go learn about AI. But one of the things that the question really gets you to is get you to the answer that you need faster. Because everybody can ask questions and everybody can get an answer, but that answer doesn't necessarily solve your problem. And the typical thought process is that everybody has a problem. I have a problem too. But your problem is not everybody else's problem. Your problem is very unique to you. You have to address it yourself. And the way you address that really impacts the output. So the digital transformation that has been happening for however many decades you want to count, 70, last 30, or just last 26, whatever the case is, this digital transformation has happened previously and will continuously happen, because the way we are communicating, right? The way we're doing the transactions in the business ecosystem for services and products, it's rapidly shifting, right? Because what used to be a small community of people doing the trades, now it's global. And because it's global, there's a lot more vulnerabilities and there's a lot more risk that not only do we have to accept it, we have to manage it, and we have to have plans for each of these risks that we will take. So with the help of YouTube, where you can find hundreds and hundreds of channels that will help you understand artificial intelligence. We have our own YouTube channel for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence that we want to tackle is the augmentative intelligence. So as you're listening to this conversation, one of the things that I would really like you to consider is augmentation of intelligence, because when it's augmentative intelligence, we get a better view that we need rather than the one that is being marketed to us. Because what's being marketed to us is a product that we have to buy, and this is not really a product anymore. This is a social issue that we have to tackle. So we cannot just work our way through the social issues just buying products. We really have to focus on what matters to the people. How does the process change? And if the process change, can the technology deliver it, right? So the people, process, and technology is something that you will hear us discuss a lot. But one of the other things that we talk about specifically, maybe not online, but on the boardroom level discussions, is that it's an 80-20 rule, right? 80% is done for you, 20% you have to do for yourself. right? So some things are done for you, some things you do for yourself, and some things that you do for yourself is where we come in. This podcast is specifically focused on the people that are not necessarily delivering the technology, not necessarily are developing this technology, and not necessarily ideating through the technology that they will need and use. So they're pretty much the end user. They're pretty much the people that benefits from the technology that works very, very well. And when technology does not work very, very well, we have to look at the 20% that we have left, right? So if you are interested in this topic called digital forensics, which happens that after an incident events or attack happens, we go in and do a forensic, and through that forensic, we find out what went wrong and what could have been done better. And that is a great time to get started with better decisions, but there's always a room to say, how can we make better decisions before we get to a point that we need digital forensics to come in and figure out what are some of the things that went wrong, or what are some of the things that got damaged during the attack or the event. So as we are moving through these technological solutions, like I said, that 80% that is delivered to you, these 80% is for everybody, right? It is not personalized to you. So your neighbor Jones has a beautiful, shiny technology, and you also have it, but you guys are using it in two different ways, right? And having it used in two different ways means that personalizing it is even more important now than it was before. The reason it's more important is because the intelligence piece of it, right? So it is augmenting intelligence. So if you provide that system almost no feedback, that feedback not being received turns into a decision that system makes on its own, because without feedback, the system will react in one way. With feedback, the system will react another way. But the type of feedback that you give it has to be personalized. That 20% goes for corporate, personal, private, government, any corner of the world you can look at. That 20% applies to everybody. So when this technology is being delivered, that 20% that falls on us, we really have to be very careful with that, because that is where the interoperability comes in. That's where the scalability comes in. That's where the sustainability comes in. Again, another 3 terms for you. Interoperability, you'll probably hear a little bit more about that at the end of this discussion. But before we get fully into the conversation, I want to introduce this video that we will cover in 3 different clips. And every time we talk about this, I'm hoping that in the chat, there will be a question. And if you have any questions, we'll go ahead and address those as well. Open a new window. Okay, so I'm opening a new window. So any questions that you have, feel free to drop it in here, and then we will continuously monitor those questions so that we can answer it.
For costs later. Or another way to look at it is technical debt is future cost from present shortcuts. It's the interest you have to pay because you didn't make a large enough down payment up front. Those future interest payments come in the form of bugs, refactoring costs, and maintenance. This practice has been around for a while, but it's really taking off with AI, where there is such a rush to deploy something, anything, to remain competitive. Let's take a look at this situation, try to understand it better, and see what we can do to prevent it. Ready, fire, aim. Who does that? Well, that's what causes technical debt, is that kind of approach. Because basically what we're doing is we do implementation, then we do deployment, and then we go back and figure out how to plan this thing. It's opposite. It's backwards. The idea is we're going to deploy it now with imperfect results and then just fix it later in the field. So go fast and break things. Well, that's what got me this. So not always what you want to do is go fast and break things. It's sort of like trying to repair a plane when it's in the air. Yeah, you can do that, but it's a lot more difficult and it's a lot more expensive and there's a lot more risk involved. So another way to look at this is if you start off with ad hoc design, well, then you're going to end up with a more fragile system. If you don't have any architecture that you've done up front, well, then you've got no future with this thing. I mean, who would build a building and not do an architecture first? You don't just start laying down bricks and then figuring out where they're going to lie later. And then ultimately what you end up with is a monolithic system instead of one that's modular. And what we want is a modular system so I can make changes later and I have the flexibility that we need. That'll actually give me more speed in the long run. So we're making strategic decisions. And so to be fair, not all technical debt is bad. Sometimes we take it on with full awareness that this is in fact what we're doing. So we've got technical debt that's strategic, and then we've got technical debt that's reckless. Strategic technical debt, that's something that we take consciously. We know what we're doing. We know that there are some risks, and we figured that the risks are worth it in this particular case, but we've thought it through. We've documented what we're doing. It's time bound. We know this is not the permanent way the system is going to work, and we have plans in place already to remediate how this system is going to work when we finally get the thing out into production or after it's through its first version. So that's a way of getting out there fast. Doesn't mean we always just sit there and overthink things, but in some cases we go fast, but we have a plan to deal with it. Now, reckless technical debt is what's caused by poor discipline.
All right. So the conversation that IBM is having here, one of the ways to emphasize the importance of what they're discussing is the AI years. If you ever get into the IBM conferences or IBM YouTube videos and discussions, you might hear this term called AI years. The reason the term that coined that terminology is because they want you to understand the value of collected data and value of not collecting those data. So one of the examples that makes it really easy to understand is that if you don't collect the data between breakfast and lunch, you've already lost out about a year's worth of data, right? It's because it could be that important that you have lost a anomaly that happened between breakfast and lunch. So if there's a disruption on you not collecting data, and if you've been collecting data and all of a sudden there's a gap in collecting those data, you could have a problematic artificial intelligence or large language model or a chatbot that's going to cause a havoc in your not understanding where things went wrong. A good, big, shining example of that is year 2020, the COVID year. Because of COVID year, we actually limited the year COVID year in order to do a lot of our analysis in artificial intelligence space. So if you're thinking about joining into the club of, hey, AI ops, ML ops, LLM ops, data ops, DevOps, all these terminologies that is in the technology field right now, it's going to get closer and closer to you. And as it does, one of the challenges that you're going to face is a lot of this data collection process, this data that will really dictate how well your system works or how much of a trouble it brings down the road. So remember, I talked about the interoperability, scalability, and sustainability. So in the DevOps space, it's called Keep It Simple and Stupid, KISS, right? KISS. KISS in MLOps and AIOps world call it Keep It Interoperable, Scalable, and Sustainable, right? These are the challenges you have to really think through. So when this video is talking about ready, fire, and aim, one of the ways we have seen it is a lot of companies are going after use cases, and then they deploy that use cases and really find out that that use case does not produce any return on investment. And there's many reasons for it, right? There's many reasons why these systems don't create that return on investments that company would really like to see. One of the main reasons that other companies are succeeding is because they have put in these ML ops, AI ops, and LLM ops in places way ahead of time before it really became about ROI. So we talked about this conversation started with the people, process, and technology, right? So if you look at the people process side of things, the people are not ready for whatever it is that the company has subscribed to, bought into, and now started using, right? And as they're using it, all of a sudden they're realizing there is no return on investment. And if you want to do some more research on that, you can look up some of the news articles that just came out probably within the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks that will describe why there is no return on investment, right? And this return on investment has been really stalled because if you look at the Wall Street financial reports from a few quarters back, you will realize that there has been a lot of these companies that has invested a lot of money into AI, but there's no return on investment. And it's not just that this company reported it and it's not a big deal. No, like literally Wall Street collapsed for a few days because of how much of a bad news those AI's return on investment bought. So one of the ways that we talk about return on investment in this podcast is ROD, return on data. If your data is not collected, if your data is not working for the way it's supposed to work, yes, there's no return on data, just like there's no return on investment. And the adoption part of it, the people and process side of things, is something that you can look up on the newspaper as well. And that's what's happening right now, is that a lot of people are not adopting artificial intelligence, even it has been rolled out, even it has been paid for. So before all the shiny objects, the shiny thing on top of the mountain, you really have to be in the valley level, look at the people side of things and say, are we ready for MLOps? Are we ready for LLM ops? Are we ready for DevOps? How do our DevOps go if you ever did one, right? A lot of the companies knows about DevOps in certain aspect of the process, but they don't understand it for the rest of the process, right? And this is crucial. This is something that you have to think about really, really hard, because we're going to talk about token next. Because you have not done this widespread all around people, everybody's involved, or at least have some stake, the skin in the game, or some sort of understanding of these ops, you are really going to have a problem with tokens down the road. So if you haven't done tokens yet, that's fine, but you will get started with tokens sooner than later, because you will understand some of the issues with the memory, you will understand some of the problems with the cloud, and then you're going to have to really address how tokens is going to impact your bottom line, your clear productivity gain. So as you're saying about people and process, if your people are not familiar with DevOps, this is a good signal for you to think of, like, okay, if we have used DevOps, but our people are not familiar with DevOps, what went wrong, right? Why don't they know about DevOps? Well, that's a sign that if you jump in with MLOps and LLM ops, you are going to experience some of the things that I just mentioned earlier in Wall Street, in SaaS apocalypse, and NVIDIA's stock price dropping over DeepSeek back in January 2025. So I see Masa here. Masa is the legend in the data space. So thank you, Masa, for being here. So really have a lot of the reflections that you have to conduct from your past information. And then the process will shift with that. Because as you think about the process, you really don't want to deliver an AI solution in the near future. What you're working on in the near future is the process that is AI adopted. And that takes a lot of thinking. So when I say you really have to familiarize with your people with LLM ops, DevOps, MLOps, AI ops, it's because this process is something that everybody in your organization is involved in. So the whole process has to be AI enabled, right? What I mean by AI enabled is not a subscription and click of a button. It's a process that you have to reconfigure how your process works today without AI, and how your process will change because of AI, and specifically for the token, which we will discuss next. This video does not have tokens, but one of the things that I want to talk about is the next part of the conversation, so that way we can sort of work our way into the tokens. And if you're interested in learning more about tokens, we did an episode about 2 weeks ago where we took Jensen Huang's interview in All In podcast, where he's talked about token. He's talked about token in a fashion that every employee, every part of the organization, every people, every process really will have an impact for the token, by the token, and later on the technology will be shifting because of the token usage. So if you know about tokenomics, you heard that from blockchain and cryptocurrency space, but here we're going to use the terminology, not tokenomics, but first day to first token, right? Day zero to first token, those sort of terminology. That means your first token deployment, how did you use large language model, and how much tokens did you use? These are some of the things that we will describe after this video.
More technical debt that occurs. Another class of technical debt is prompt technical debt. Prompt is what the user is putting into the system, if we're talking about a chatbot, for instance. So we may have an undocumented system prompt. The system prompt's the thing that you feed into the large language model, telling it what its context is. And if that's not documented, we don't know what kind of a system we're going to end up with in the long run. So we need to make sure that we've thought through those kinds of things. We might have no validation of the inputs coming in. The prompts that are coming in, this can be not just input from the user, but it could be input into the system and change the behavior of the system. It may override the prompt, the system prompt, and that's what we call a prompt injection. So we need to not incur those kinds of situations. Prompt injection is something that absolutely result from going too fast and not checking for all the cases. We could result in data leakage. As I mentioned before, if we're not checking the information that went into the model, well, then we could have the model with sensitive information. At minimum, when we're having information exfiltrating, coming out of this thing as a prompt response, I want to make sure that I'm not leaking sensitive data. So that means, and also that if I've not put any guardrails in place, well, then I'm going to incur more technical debt. That could come in the form of lawsuits and things like that. So one of the things that helps here is putting an AI gateway between the user and the AI model and have it check the inputs that are coming in, block the things that look like prompt injections or look like they might be getting around the guardrails, and also redact the information that's coming out that might be of a sensitive nature. And then our last category of technical debt is organizational technical debt. In this case, we have basically what the organization sees from all of this perspective. We're asking questions. If we didn't decide who owns this thing, we didn't decide what is the governance policy for this thing. If I don't have a policy in place, then I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or not. And I'm going to figure it out later, and it's going to cost more later. So it's much better if we have also done red teaming, basically testing the system out and putting it through its paces. If I don't plan properly, the system could have latency. It could be slow to respond, and it's not going to, we did it in the prototype, we moved fast, it all looked great. Then we put it in the field and it didn't work great because all of a sudden everybody starts hitting it and it doesn't have the capacity. It could end up costing us more if we didn't plan for this.
All right, back here. Okay. So one of the things that you are hearing is a lot of prepping here, right? This is a lot of preparation for the future vulnerabilities, because like I said, the shining thing on the top of the valley really looks really shiny, really good, really achievable. All the neighbors have it. Why don't I have it? There's a lot of emotional intelligence tackling right here, is that you really have to think through your current state, as it stays, and to be state. And in the to be state, you're going to have lots of conversations about tokens. You're going to have day 0 to first token, first day to first token. You'll hear a lot of this terminologies about token. And the reason you are hearing about tokens recently is because we started with this terminology prompt. Prompt is something that everybody's familiar with. Prompt is something that we've been hearing about for the last 3 years. But one of the things that you probably haven't heard before is natural language processing, NLP. NLP to me is far more clear instruction on how to adopt artificial intelligence for your business rather than, say, large language model. Because NLP has been around since 1980s, and now in 2026, we use the word LLM, we use the word chatbot, we use the word artificial intelligence to convolute all this information. But one of the ways to simplify that information is to talk about text to text. If you say text to text, this is what you are seeing with ChatGPT today. This is what you're seeing with Claude today. That you put in a chat, you put in some text in the chat, and then the chat generates more text for you, right? If it's not text, it's text to image. If it's not text, text to text, it's text to video, right? It creates a video. Sora, Gemini has multiple of these available tools that you can make videos with. And you have text to many things, right? Text to N, you can do that. And one of the text to N is text to coding, text to code. That means if you type in something on ChatGPT or Claude, it will take that text and take those text, turn it into a code for a logic that you put in through those texts, right? So this text-to-text capability has been around since 1980, but this text-to-code is what's really shaping all the conversation about prompt engineering, prompt generation, usage of prompt, and doing business around prompt. And we can go on and on about prompt because it will really take us a whole lot of time to understand these prompts. The text to code and the token is very much something that I want to talk to you about, because even though if it's technical, it's really important as a CEO, CFO, and COO, you really recognize the value of prompt today and the token usage down the road, because the prompt that you see today are not really that expensive for you, right? And the reason it's not expensive is because It's what happens over and over in technology field where they spend billions and billions of dollars in order to capture a market segment. And once they capture that market segment, they really make sure that you have no other alternatives, right? So the alternatives that you have today, if you start with that today, you can actually grow both sides of the equation. So remember the 80-20 I mentioned. 80% is that market segment that they will capture, and they will provide the 80% to the full market, and 20% is what you have to do. And if you can maintain that 20% today using prompt like you do today, and then if you generate tokens because of those prompts, all of a sudden you start having a parallel experience that is not necessarily all controlled by this 80%, right? This 20% you can control. And between those 80 and 20, there's a loss of conversation, a lot of transactions that are happening, and it reduces the cost because you don't have to subscribe to everything. You don't have to buy everything. You can build some of your own. So token, as we are talking about token, one of the conversations that we will have is build versus buy, right? So buy is that 80%, build is that 20%. So if you have that build that is made for you for 20%, when you're generating those tokens on 20% side, this 20% token, you really want to reduce the cost. You really want to keep everything safe and secure, guardrailed. And of course, all those things with prompts that are going wrong today, you want to reduce those problems down the road. So down the road, as you're using tokens, down the road, one of the things that you will have is tokens that are not necessarily just what, you, me, and some other people in the organization will experience. It's everybody's going to generate those tokens. Everybody's going to use those tokens. And these tokens, there's some good news about it, bad news about it, but it has lots to do with lots of memory. And tokens have memory issues that is not being addressed right now. And if it's not being addressed right now, what that means is that down the road, if we address it later, it's going to cost us more. So we really have to prep ourselves with the people side of the equation. For us to prep that 20%, we have to really start with the people and give them the understanding of tokens and the way that they use tokens. And then these tokens, as we talked about, the usage is increasing, it's scaling. How do we sustain that token usage is something that we're going to have to talk through because of memory. And this is something that we will not cover in this discussion because it's a really lengthy and very technical conversation to have. But if you're interested, we will make an episode about memory and all the memory shortages in the space right now that is really going to have a bottleneck effect in many of these places, even in the 80% side of the equation. So that 20% that you are dealing with right now, you really want to prep yourself ahead of time for these memory issues. And there's few alternatives that you can do actually that is not necessarily going to impact you down the road. So the token pieces, you really have to prep your people for the token pieces. And these tokens really generate a lot of memory issues. And the token usage that you have today, if you think about it, multiplying it for 100 other people, or if you have a staff of 1,000, everybody's going to use token. That's just the first line of calculation, right? That's the first line of concerns of line items, right? These tokens are not necessarily just you're using tokens. It's system that uses token. There's a system token that you have to allot to the system and let the system do it. And what does that mean? Well, that means the chatbot in your organizational website, right? So if you have a customer-facing chatbot, how much prompt is that using? How much token is it using? How much tokens are we using in between our, say, CFO's desk all the way to the end user's desk, right? And in between that, there's a lot of IoT devices. There's a lot of conversations that are happening. Say, for example, CFO and end user. Well, we're not thinking about how much token is being used for your AR/APs, your account receivable and account payable. You're not really thinking through what are some of the things that is needing for your social media feed, right? As you can imagine, these are a lot of text to text, but text to text requires lots of token. Now imagine it's text to token, text to code. And text to code means you're going to generate not only one time, but multiple iterations, because as you can imagine, code does not work very well the first time. It needs multiple iterations in order to get to a position where it's perfectly good, well performing, right? And that didn't make any sense. What I meant to say is it's working to the standards of the business logic, because when you start coding, one of the things you're going to realize, again, that 80-20 effect, the code will come 80%, but you have to really work through the last 20% of it, because the code that is generated in the text to code, it's not perfect the first time. And you really have to get to a point of, say, make it work 95% effectively. Okay, just checking on some of the messages here. All right. I think it's worth discussing the latency part of it, because the latency, you'll hear a lot about ownership. Of course, you'll talk about MLOps, you'll talk about DevOps. Ownership is critical on all of these tools. And as you're going through this digital transformation, you will have to talk about ownership a lot more than what you have done with DevOps. Because you're dealing with an intelligent system, you have a lot of succession planning to do as well, because it's sort of like transferring a baby from one adult to another adult for a long period of time. So when you have a succession coming up, you really have to focus on how it is that you do the succession. Latency is your ultimate optimizing situation, right? So if you want to break it down, currently the stage you're in is the opportunity stage. You're staking out the opportunities, you're researching these opportunities, you're really diagnosing your business process for these opportunities. But as you go through any opportunities, which you have for the last 10, 15, 20, 30, however long you've been in business, opportunity to optimization has a long bridge. But the shorter those bridges are, more bridges you get, better optimization you get over time. You don't want to optimize one time, you want to optimize continuously, which is something that you will see in MLOps space, which is a continuous development, continuous integration. So this the latency piece is something that is part of the optimization. And it's a big one, because if you think you have an advantage over other companies, these other companies can catch up to you because you are slowing down eventually, and they just started yesterday. Right. So even if you have an early start, your latency can bottle up a lot of those things. So really, when you do optimization, you have to think about the latency. And one of the things about latency you have to think about is cloud. Where does your data live? If you're a cloud native operation right now, that's perfectly well and good. But if you can imagine the ballooning cost of doing more data processing in the cloud, means that your cost goes up with it, right? So you really have to think through, like, okay, where does my hardware live? Does this hardware live under my desk, or does it live in Ohio while I'm doing business in Texas, right? The amount of distance that the data has to travel, the data ownership of it, who owns the data, how they own it, what are they doing with that data, who's using it? There's a lot of questions to be had, right? So you really want to be able to say, I can take advantage of current hardware situation and position myself to use this hardware under my desk. So that way the data is traveling from my laptop to the hardware under my desktop, and under my desktop is where it's being processed. And if better, it is also being stored there. But there's a huge calculations behind it. But one of the reasons I tell you about this is because as you're hearing a lot about memory shortages, you're going to hear a lot about CPU shortages as well, because the CPUs are overwhelmed at this point. And just a case in point I can give you, like GitHub. The reason GitHub, I want to give you this, but I want to give you context about GitHub. GitHub is where all the coding happens at current space. It's like GitHub is like a cloud of coding, right? So GitHub has multiple issues. One of them being that it's not able to keep up because of the CPU usage is being dedicated to other usage. And all of a sudden you see in the cloud space, the CPU shortage is happening in real time. And that's not good for many businesses, along with also because the data ownership of the cloud. Remember I talked about that? GitHub has all the ownership of the codes. So even if it's your private code, GitHub has access to it, and GitHub will use it for its own benefit. And GitHub is owned by Microsoft, and there's so many other relations that you can look at. But these are some of the things that you have to think through about having a hardware right under your desk, because if you have the storage under your desk as well, you're better off, because not everything has to be under your desk and everything has to be stored under your desk. But you have to be able to say, who's the data owner here, and how much latency am I addressing here, and what are some of the costs that I can calculate ahead of time, so that way there, as I'm doing calculations, there's less cost of missed opportunity than not, right? Because you don't want to have having everything dependent on the cloud space. So you kind of want to go to the hybrid experience as well. So that way you can say, I own majority of my data portfolio versus my data portfolio is nowhere near me. Okay, so I'll play the last clip, and it's 36 minutes. If you have questions as you're listening, please do ask, because if you ask those questions, I'll be able to give you an answer that is going to benefit you more than it will benefit, say, somebody who's far more versed into this conversation, like Sergio and Masa. Just gotta tell you about Masa. He's a great guy. Has lots of depth and knowledge, but very humble. Is very humble. I love Masa, and I love Sergio because Sergio is just amazing in the GRC space. Lots of years in Microsoft and DoD space, and just a pleasure to be around. So I'm going to play the last clip. Give me a second. Let me turn over the.
Ready, fire, aim. Okay, we can all agree that's not the way to do it. We need to be able to do ready, aim, fire. So what does that look like in terms of an IT project, and in particular an AI project? Well, it's the basics we need to remember. We don't get to skip just because it's AI. We start with requirements. We move then into architecture. Then we go to implementation. Don't start with that. Then we move into testing it. Then we deploy it. Then we evaluate what we've done. And then we feed all of that back into our requirements. Nothing about this changes. That's still true, and it still applies to AI projects. If you think about it this way, AI technical debt is what results from speed minus discipline equals this massive compounding interest on the debt. And what we want to do is burn down that debt. In other words, if you don't put enough money down on that home loan, you're going to be paying on interest forever, and the house is going to cost way more. Another way to think of it, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Because if you don't, there's no telling where you're going to end up. And worse still, there's no telling how much you're going to owe for the experience.
Okay. So you heard the man, he said it, right? This is something that we will deal with over the months and years to come. But for tokens specifically, we will have to contribute more of our attention to this token usage. The future business strategy is not to say we strategize and we operationalize, but only few people knows the strategy. I think that needs to change really, really dramatically. This is not a technical challenge. This is a emotional intelligence channel. So everybody really has to get involved in the strategy part of it, because the strategy is, if you don't adopt it, who will, right? And whoever's adopting it, how much of ownership are they taking of it, right? So let's say, for example, if you have a month where things went haywire and you've used way too much token, I would love to share some slides with you if you're interested. You can put that on the chat as well. I will show you some of those numbers. This because if you have ownership from all level of your operations and the tactical side of things, you really have a human observability, right? The humans are going to tell you, like, look, I just saw something that is not good. I don't want this to continue, because the operationalizing it means that they need to know what is the cost of that token, right? The cost of token that they're not familiar with today, if they see it over and over, they're going to become used to it. They're not going to realize for that 1 month when things went haywire and all of a sudden bill is 1.5 million more than what it's supposed to be, right? And I'm not talking about this from 80-20 fraction, because when it's an 80% thing, when the tokens are generated on the 80% side, you really have a different sort of billing versus the tokens that are generated on the 20% side. So even though there's a different type of billing, they still cost money, right? At the end of the day, I don't know your cost infrastructure. If your cost infrastructure is just electricity on 20% side of things, that's fine, but it's 20% of your electricity that's going to go up in price. Yeah, that summarizes AI implementation without AI governance and strategy. Absolutely, absolutely. Because we spend a lot of time in governance, and I'll tell you, months and months of governance and months of strategy. Really, it's just a part of the beast. It's just the nature of digital transformation and intelligence side of things. Because I'll tell you one thing, Masa specifically can tell you more about that. It's a software 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. right? If you know software 1.0, it's because you've lived through 1996 when everything was so badly coded, right? Everything was badly coded. So now all of a sudden you have software 2.0, the coding looks so much fresher, right? Because it was calling on information that code itself was calling this information. Now imagine this, artificial intelligence, using tokens, calling information from all around the globe. All of a sudden your token bill goes up because of what? Software 3.0. The software 3.0 is so much more powerful because there's still a code, but it's generating intelligence, and those intelligence calling is not necessarily just coming from an Excel sheet that uses 150,000 tokens, right? It goes up in numbers, exponentially grows throughout the globe. If it's calling for information from Wall Street, Mahwah, New Jersey, it's calling from information from Shanghai, China, it's calling from Hong Kong, so many different places. Now imagine the cost of just having those data come into your organization and having those unnecessary amount of data coming through your organization. So kind of, if you visualize what Masa was talking about, is that when somebody in operation side or tactical side, day-to-day operation, does not understand these differences, you're going to have some great AI system, yet the cost of keeping those AI systems is just not something you can sustain. So again, interoperability, scalability, and sustainability, you can put this in this level or all the way down here, right? You can measure interoperability, scalability, and sustainability in all levels. But I think I would want to use an example here. Like if you're up here, you're thinking about from like, say, the cost of oil, cost of LNG, cost of helium, the effect of helium in your memory systems and your GPU productions. All of a sudden, you come down here, you realize that interoperability is going to be so important for you, because helium, if that causes your business to stop, you have to know the alternative. And the reason you have the alternative is because you want to develop the interoperability, right? So what you're depending on 80%, if 80% the cost goes up, all of a sudden in 20% side, you have an interoperability with alternative systems. And these alternative systems, you have to maintain them just in case this 80% goes down. And I don't think I have to tell you, in AI space for the last 3 years, that has been the case over and over. A lot of productions, a lot of marketing, and lots of these things that came to the market, they no longer exist. Just within 3 years, they vanished. But once that has remained, all of a sudden you see the prices going up because they have captured the good market segment, and now they can say, you have no alternative, you have to pay this price, right? Which is part of doing business, but at the same time, if you have an alternative, you can always make a decision on, look, I can own this hardware and I can run this locally in my system, and I can reduce the cost that way. So optimization, the opportunity is all here, but optimization is what you have to think through. And IBM video mentioned some of the risk categories. So if you're interested in watch those IBM videos are really, really eye-openers for some of those future vulnerability assessments. So you really have to think through, like, okay, if I have the system today, the way it runs today, it generates this much money, what can it generate for me if I was to own the full infrastructure, right? Instead of being in the cloud, you have the full infrastructure. And just because you have the full infrastructure does not mean you're off the cloud. You can actually create a private cloud that is, how do I say it, far more secure, right? The chances of it going down is probably in your control rather than none. I'm pointing at AWS event that happened over the last few years in North Virginia. You can look at it from the CrowdStrike perspective if you like. You can look at it from many perspectives. But this data and operations stalling is something that you have to think about as part of your business risk. So I think I've meant to actually do this for 45 minutes. So I'm literally on the point of 45 minutes. I'm going to jump off, but if you're watching this video down the road a few weeks from now, whenever you see it, still feel free to ask those questions on this live stream, so that way I know who's asking those questions and how I can answer it for them. We have a YouTube channel. We are continuously fielding questions, and we're answering those questions as well. So feel free to check out those YouTube channels. Connect with us on LinkedIn, so that way you know that there's lots of information that but it's very hard to keep up with this information just from last 24 days. This last 24 days, lots of things have happened. Project Glasswing, Mythos, so many other terminologies that are just flashing all over the news alert headlines, right? But hey, look, these are not new news. Actually, they're just being wrapped as a new news. But there's a different kind of vulnerabilities that comes with the new news. Of course, you can see Fed chair and then the White House staffs are all over the banks going around and making sure that they're all secured against mythos. So looking forward to your questions, looking forward to your comments. I try to keep it under 45 minutes so that way you can get as much information as you need for the rest of the week. And if you enjoy this information and you appreciate this information, please let us know so that way we will know who it is that's listening and we can format the information according to that. Thank you so much. Ciao.